Season 9 has been out for a few days now, so I think we've all got a better understanding of what's absolutely broken, and I want to have a meta discussion here today. We do know that Alec Dawson stated that there will be an upcoming balance patch, which is going to tune down the size of some of the projectiles. We're not sure which ones yet, but they seem happy overall with the health adjustments and how it's affected time to kill. But that leads me to the very first thing that I hope they change. The main thing that I think stands out like a sore thumb as being clearly over the top is Zenyatta, who has turned into the most effective support in the entire game. So I've been noticing some things that I think are kind of cool with this new version of Overwatch, and Zenyatta is like the best example of how this new format has broken the game in his favor anyway. Well, old Zenyatta in the burst meta had to play closer to cover and use his alternate fire more, where he would have to hide away, peek out, burst out his volley of orbs, and if he didn't do that and he standed out in the open, he'd very easily die to anything because there's a lot of burst damage in the game, and if you're picking Zen, you don't really have burst heals or an escape or any defenses. But now that everyone's got more health, including Zenyatta at 275, which I think is a little bit of an outrageous number considering a character like Brig only has 250, but Zen can't really get one shot by most things, and in fact, that allows him to not have to hide on cover as much and stand out in the open. So the interesting thing to me is that the health rearrange, where the time to kill on everything is a bit longer, allows Zen to play out in the open more, Medusa staring down at the tank as long as he wants. He kind of floats out in the middle of the fight, walking like an Egyptian, just kicking and swinging away, and you can't really burst him with a lot of things, despite his hitbox being bigger, which is kind of strange, mainly because his hitbox on his projectiles are better too. So he's just sort of like an extra DPS character in a game where dealing damage is very important and required to kill anything. Otherwise, the time to kill in team fights can last quite a while. Zen kind of breaks that. In my opinion, what I would like to see them do is just nerf his health down a bit. I personally don't mind the fact that everybody's hitting more shots now. I think that makes the game feel better and more approachable to a wider demographic of players as opposed to just appealing to the hundreds of pro players that have elite level mechanics. I think this version of the game is way more fun, but Zen standing out as just having an outmoded amount of value. I also think it's reasonable to say that Discord Orb is just overly effective against tanks always, and the new mechanic of being able to outplay it by hiding around in cover, waiting for a few seconds, and then having a window where you can't be discorded again, that's nice and better than not having it, but it's also super lame, and it just requires the tank to slow down and hide in a corner and say, guys, I can't contribute to the fight for the next few seconds until this Discord's off me. You can't play the game while the Discord exists, so you have to constantly be battling on getting it off you. Now I'll talk about the tank experience, which I think is vastly improved with this new version of the game, mainly because although your hitbox is bigger, you are getting hit pretty much all the time anyway. I never really feel like there's a case where I'm dying much easier than before, except maybe against the Hanzo as a shieldless tank, but in general, I feel like I can extend my health points more easily and not be so punished for making a small mistake as tank right now, except for Discord. Okay, we'll have to put that off to the side. The major benefit a lot of these new tanks have is like two things. Either they interact to counter the DPS passive of the enemy team by having a shield like Reinhardt, or two anti-DPS abilities like Sigma. Diva's really good. Winston Bubble can get in the way, or you can play really fast with characters like Wrecking Ball or Junker Queen with speed and aggression to go at the enemy and make use of your DPS passive. Those are like the two styles of play. You can anchor and actually tank and deny damage. That's something I really love about this version of the game right now, is that you're able to make space for the team as opposed to need to kill everything yourself. Your DPS can hit shots easier, so they're more reliable and less useless as teammates, and they also apply the passive that makes your targeting with them more effective. I think tank is waiting to be very, very fun as soon as Zen isn't hard marking tanks too easily, stepping out in the middle of the entire field, and you can't really interact with him and he hard destroys you. Another fun factor aspect of the game for me is that support is much more rewarding to play because it isn't so free and forgiving. Like, there's useful decisions to make on what character you pick and your playstyle. Some surprising things I found is a character like Lifeweaver, who I thought, okay, wasn't going to add very much because healing's not so good. Well, yes and no. It's like when they're using the DPS passive against something, you're not going to expect to overheal to save them. However, being a safe support with escapes is very good. Lifeweaver being kind of untargetable still with his pedal improvements, you can't cleave through it. You can yoink them out of focus fire range and does offer more healing. You can still get in healing attritional battles with characters like Lifeweaver and Batiste, who offer a lot of healing, and perhaps you may out heal the enemy if they're playing characters like Kiriko, for example, who really feels like she can't heal anything against the DPS passive, whereas Lifeweaver and Batiste at least have extra buttons to either burst or save their allies. The thing I love about it right now is that those support cooldowns are more key and more focal rather than just their healing stats alone. And they sort of fix the supports are just DPS but better problem because DPS apply the passive. And what that means is a character like Kiriko that in the past could go on solo flank missions and kill multiple enemies in the backline and get out and heal the team. That was incredible, the ceiling of what that character could do. Now, if you try to overly deal damage as support with the health increase, it's really hard for me anyway, even with the increased hitbox sizes, to solo carry with DPS with a character like Batiste or Kiriko, because you're going to kill so much more efficiently if you just target the thing your DPS is firing at. So rather than starve them of resources, empowering them and playing around that passive is how you're going to secure kills. So you shouldn't necessarily neglect them just to deal damage, because you're doing so much less impactful damage when you damage instead of letting your DPS damage, which is supposed to be their job. Gone are the days that the DPS should just hide and not really contribute while the supports do everything. And I like that. With support being weaker, you can notice more skill expression in the role because you don't just easily carry the entire fight with just spamming your abilities out in front of you. A character like Batiste, for example, is a lot more fun now that his healing nades deal less because, well, one, he benefits from that big projectile increase, so I'm hitting more shots. Because it's harder to manage how much healing you can give your team, you have more skill expression in deciding who you're going to help when. And so the margins of error with your healing accuracy or targeting is more obvious, especially when you're going up against the enemy support trying to keep everybody alive. So although the max offense support Zenyatta benefits the most, healing as a concept isn't gone entirely. In fact, it's made more interesting by it being weaker than it was before. A couple key highlights in the support category. Of course, we're not doing a full tier list here because they're going to be rebalancing the game in a few days anyway, so I'm going to wait for that. But I think you can pick up on some of the general themes that we're discussing here. I think a character that players seem to be picking without knowing how bad she is Ana. Ana is really bad in this new version of the game. Before, the healing values were so strong, healing as a concept was insane. You would need a burst impact to just deal damage effectively to anything. So that means sleeping or nading a target would help you burst them down. Now you're kind of all in on that play working, and because the targets have more health anyway, it's less likely you can burst that thing even if you anti it. And Ana has a really big head hitbox size problem in the room where all the hitboxes got bigger, so all of a sudden now Ana's little flimsy hitbox, the granny hunch that she used to be able to dodge a lot of shots with, her head is just absorbing everything now. And so because of that, you can easily trade out the Ana later in the fight, whereas these supports that either can get away or just deal more consistent offense, where Ana's like a burst of offense, she's pretty weak, I would say, and essentially requires a lot of babysitting, and you must play like Lifeweaver Brig or something else to protect her. I feel like just an average Tracer player can look in her general direction when she doesn't have nade and easily burst her from medium range now. That head hitbox is so big. There's been a lot of debates on whether Mercy is worse or better in this version of the game. Well, because we're enabling DPS, I think Mercy is a lot better than some of the more exploitable supports. Now, the last role to talk about is the damage category. That's the one that I think has the most controversy because it's the class that is hitting you with all of these bigger hitboxes, especially a character like Hanzo, which with a Mercy Pocket can one-shot log you across the map around corners. Ashe is very good. Soldier's very good. Genji is very, very good. Tracer seems kind of insane. There's a lot of characters in the damage category that are competitive, but in my opinion, so far, they do the thing I expect them to do. I've preached this for a long time in Overwatch, where we have to be careful which characters we are allowing to be the top priority picks in the game. Far worse is a world where characters like Bastion, Mei, and Reaper are easily the top DPS picks. Those characters right now, I think, are kind of suffering a little bit because other ones that can either play more fluidly, play more aggressively, have a higher skill ceiling, although it's, a little easier to achieve the skill ceiling with easier hitboxes, but those characters are now shining, and I think that's the right way to play the game and for it to function. And we were kind of wondering before this patch came out and we had time to play on it, how this would affect the game. What would happen if all of the player base had a higher accuracy but a lower time to kill? An example I used in my previous video is that a character like Widow hits you easier, but bigger projectiles, especially like Lucio's damage, or Genji gets a smaller projectile increase. These characters shoot back at the Widow easier. So both of you, whoever takes the engagement first and better, typically wins it. And I think that's kind of how Overwatch should function. I've noticed that back in the day, Widowmaker, if she went on a flank and the targets weren't looking at her and were just accidentally strafing, you could easily head juke away from a Widow's shot and she would whiff and then you would turn and she would die. It was all in on that shot hitting. Now, I think a surprise angle from some of these sniper characters is way more devastating on like Ashe or Widow specifically. Hanzo a little less so because he can't one shot on his own, but those are much more reliable shots once they surprise you with an angle. But if they're on a reliable angle, you kind of know you can hit them reliably too. So it's not as threatening as it sounds, and it gets more into like the way you take the engagement with your movement, and you can kind of expect that the character that's set up is going to hit their shots like you should expect them to, I think, as opposed to it being a little bit more random whether they kill you or not. Because of that, I think the intelligence requirement and the game sense of the game is more focal as opposed to it being kind of haphazard and random if they hit the shot or not. Overall, the general themes of the patch, I think, because DPS and specifically like hard carry style, aim reliant with less aim now type heroes are good, that makes defensive teamwork based tanks also good, where prior to that you kind of just wanted to solo carry or just like sustain as the tank and take as much damage and hide. Now you want to make space for your damage, kind of like you did in Overwatch 1. I feel like we're kind of returning back to those kind of positioning battles that a lot of players were missing in Overwatch 2 because it kind of played so much more scrimmy. It feels to me that we're returning back to a place where there's a positioning battle happening with the tank line to set up your DPS, similar to how Overwatch 1 played, which was much more about two team comps kind of forming together, whereas in different parts of Overwatch 2's lifetime, it was lopsided where the emphasis was. Like supports were super easy to kill at first, then they were super powered later. Now I would say each role does what I want it to do, and the things that you should aim to do in that role aren't surprising. Like they're not out of the ordinary of what the role expectation would be. I don't think this patch is balanced yet, but it's not like super imbalanced either, because a lot of the same hero matchups you expect to work still do, generally speaking, but they certainly did add a much more crucial team comp building component to this version of the game, with the time to kill longer and the DPS passive being so important. Like you have to build a comp that can functionally get that passive working effectively in order for your comp to work at all. And because of that, I've noticed that actually this version has been more steamrolly, where your comp functions well, theirs doesn't. They have no chance to engage in the game at all. If they have one character that's taking bad flanks or is dragging down the potential of the comp by being on a unsynergistic hero, that has ripple effects to the whole team because it's much more of a team-oriented game now. As like a meta theory crafting nerd, I don't hate this because I feel like I can switch to whatever character should best optimally help the situation, but I also think you're going to be like hard held down by players that don't know how to effectively work together as a team. And something on this patch I'm realizing that you're going to be able to take advantage of is when that's the case, you really got to look at your own solo impact and surviving and utilizing that new self-heal passive between fights. Like notice when fights are not going to win because it's really hard to mechanically burst your way out of a losing fight. Instead, it's much more about the game sense of setting up a good overall fight more commonly. Whereas in the previous version of the game, there was higher peak output potential to clutch up and do something nutty. So that was more common. I think playing a little safer and team reliant is a bit of a more reliable way to play. I think that's what the meta is evolving into a bit, noticing that the team can be more stable, similar to the way that Overwatch 1 comps were, but not too much, okay? Not into like the double shield and nothing dies, hopefully. I think we'll all get better at realizing this over time and learn to appreciate the depth now that Overwatch 2 has. Guys, let me know what you think about the balance right now in the game. Do you think that more characters should be adjusted? The main one focal point for me is Zenyatta. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to actually get notified when our videos come out. That's been it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. I'll see you guys next time.